Hello, my name is Liz Taylor. I'm going to be talking to you about science denial. So while I'm here, I'm not a scientist. Anyone here a scientist? No? Okay. Oh yes, you are. And so nobody presumably is a climate scientist. And I'm not here to tell anyone what to think. I'm talking about it because I've been doing research for 20 years, working and lecturing in sustainability. I have questions and concerns about profit-driven decision-making, corporate control, big pharma, fake science, and the politicians and press who seem to be under their influence. These are important questions which we need to dig into properly, and I am not convinced by the answers that are provided for in the light. So I think we might start with the same questions, but the answers that are provided there are diverting a lot of really good people. When I shared some of these thoughts with some people handing out the light, some were quite reasonable. I had some interesting conversations, and some turned their backs on me and called me a zealot, which I found really weird. I don't know what that is. What got me interested in science is Isaac Asimov. When I was a child, I read a lot of science fiction, and I just loved the way he wrote. And I found out that he wrote about science fact as well. And he wrote these two books about physical sciences and biological sciences, and that got me really excited, so excited about science that I decided I was going to be an astrophysicist, until I realised that my maths and my physics are good, but not that good. So I had to kind of scale that ambition back. But these are two quotes about science that I really like from Isaac Asimov. Science doesn't purvey absolute truth. Science is a mechanism. It's a way of trying to improve your knowledge of nature. It's a system for testing your thoughts against the universe and seeing whether they match. The process of science involves a slow forward movement through the reachable portions of the universe, a gradual unfolding of parts of the mystery. So it's that idea that it's not a fixed thing, science. Hasn't got the absolute answers. There's this unknown world that we're discovering all the time with all the work we do. And I found that really exciting and inspiring. So what am I going to talk about? I'm going to talk a little bit about why this matters, a bit about the history, some definitions, some debunking tips, some light stories, and some reasons for denial, and then what we can do. You can see that's like a huge amount of stuff, so I'm going to whiz through it, and I'm really sorry if I kind of miss some things, because I will barely scratch the surface. So why does science denial matter? I think because, in my opinion, we're fairly close to it being too late, and that really worries me. And because right now, fossil fuel emissions are at a record high, and March 2024 was the 10th straight month to be the hottest on record. And if, as deniers claim, we are being controlled by some shadowy elite who restrict our freedoms to cut carbon emissions, well, they're not doing a very good job of it, are they, that shadowy elite? That's a little bit disappointing. And yet, we still seem to think that infinite economic growth is a good idea on a finite Earth. So also, individual action is important, but to create real lasting change, we need serious political action and system change. And that can only happen if we vote for it, and people in power don't block it. And it is the voters who are the targets of disinformation and denial, and that's why it matters. So, a tiny bit of history. Resistance to science isn't new. Galileo was convicted of heresy when he claimed that the Earth revolved around the sun. Charles Darwin's theory of evolution by natural selection challenged religious beliefs. The theory that germs, not miasma, caused infections and disease was resisted. This resistance is a natural reaction when we need to change our attitudes and behaviour, or something threatens our identity and beliefs. And think about that for later. And deliberate denial also is not new. So from the 1950s, tobacco companies, I'm sure a lot of you know, suppressed their own research linking smoking with cancer. They denied the findings, and then they spread disinformation about uncertainty over decades. This allowed them to keep earning huge profits, avoid responsibility and payments of damages to their victims, and meanwhile, lots of people died. And then other corporations thought that's the good model to use, so they decided to follow their lead. Pesticide producer Monsanto defamed Rachel Carson, author of Silent Spring. Industry refuted its role in acid rain. DuPont dismissed the role of CFCs in ozone depletion. And since 1977, Exxon and others have had evidence for the effect of on the global climate from burning fossil fuels, but have been spreading lies about the uncertainty of climate science. And coincidentally, they used the same PR consultants as Monsanto did. So now, today, we also have endless information and opinions offered by the internet and social media. For everyone, this seems to be a deeply unsettling time, as some people have already mentioned. Many of us feel very worried about things that we can't control. As the damage caused by the climate crisis becomes more and more visible, the fossil fuel and other industries are stepping up their disinformation in a desperate attempt to protect their profits. And don't think that that's not happening. So, doing research, what's the definition? There isn't apparently a definition of research. There's a simple searching for knowledge and searching for truth, and there's a more formal, a systematic study of problem attacked by deliberately choosing strategy, designing research hypotheses, choosing methods and techniques, selecting or developing data collection tools, processing the data, interpreting the data, and ending with presenting the solutions of the problem. And science, as Isaac Asimov said, doesn't give us absolute truth. Here are 3 quotes that I think kind of sum up those limits of science. So although scientists have made significant mistakes, the systematicity and social nature of science allows for self-correction over time. Missteps, wrong assumptions, faulty experiments, and even fraud are eventually uncovered and replaced with ideas that better describe the natural world. And then the true value of science comes from adopting a scientific attitude. That is, an openness to seek new evidence and a willingness to change one's mind in the light of evidence. And then finally, scientists are fallible and imperfect humans. They're not like robots or anything, or they might be in the future. And there is no single method that leads to some objective truth. Rather, trust comes from the social character of science and the role it plays in vetting claims. And this is what builds what we have. So what's science denial? Well, there's skepticism, and a lot of science deniers like to call themselves science skeptics. But skepticism is a questioning attitude or doubt towards knowledge claims that are seen as mere belief or dogma. And that's a reasonable attitude to have. Denial is the systematic rejection of empirical evidence to avoid things which are personally or subjectively undesirable facts or conclusions. And then pseudoscience consists of statements, beliefs, or practices that claim to be both scientific and factual, but are incompatible with the scientific method. So, who here thinks that they're a science denier? I'm the only one. Well, basically, I say I'm really serious about tackling the climate crisis. Yeah. So, and I know what needs to be done, and yet I'm burning gas in my boiler to heat my home to keep warm. So I'm denying. I have to every day. I'm like, no, that's not happening. No, I'm not destroying the earth. So that's all going on at some level for most of us. And that's a really nice illustration. If you ever get to look at it in more detail, kind of different types of characteristics that we have. There are 5 techniques that are used for science denial. And the top 5, and then you can see there's lots of subcategories below. I won't go into them, and I'm going to brush over this, but if you're interested, it's really fascinating. And there's a really excellent website, which I linked to in this, called skepticalscience.com, where they've done an amazing job of identifying a huge range of science denial myths. So there's fake experts, where they use people who claim to be scientific experts. There's logical fallacies, things like red herrings, oversimplification, other techniques like that. Impossible expectations, so this idea of thinking that science has to have the absolute answer and the truth, and which we've discussed isn't possible. Cherry picking, where they pick out certain bits of data and ignore all the stuff that doesn't agree with what they want. And conspiracy theories, which we've already heard a little bit about. So, and there are 3 elements to debunk and to an effective debunking, which they've identified on skepticalscience.com. So the main thing is to start with the fact, not the myth. Because if you start with the myth, you draw more attention to the myth, and people don't listen to the fact. So you start, and I've tried to do this here, I hope I have managed it. You start with the fact, be really clear, make it punchy, make it easy to remember, and then you talk about the myth in a lower way and explain the fallacy that's being used in that myth. So I'm just going to go through a few myths, 5 myths, very quickly. So the one about some graphs, which James already showed you a bit of. So cherry-picked data was used to trick the readers. So they took this chunk of data, claiming that the flatness didn't go along with the CO2 going up, but they took it out of a longer-term trend that was going up. And you can see here, no warming for 10 years, no warming for 8 years, no warming for 6 years. And then overall, obviously there is warming. So that's a nice little animation from our website. So, and then there's one page from the last issue of The Light. So at first glance, I thought an engaging headline that I might agree with. Net zero, the ultimate folly. Then lots of text, scientific-looking graph, and an advert for itself. It must be an in-depth analysis of the many problems with net zero, of which I can talk about on another talk one day, if you like. But then I looked closer. It's mostly an angry rant rehashing a story about ULEZ, claiming it's not a way of reducing air pollution and saving lives, but a secret plan to cut carbon emissions. Aha, they've uncovered this amazing plan. Then a bit about net zero, then a bit about the graph and that old tale about the Earth being warmer in the past, and then finally, the usual dig at the UN. No mention of the actual problems with net zero, no solutions proposed, and an author who's a former Politico, I don't know what Politico is, and a journalist. So a look at the graph in more detail. Basically, they claim that this lump, this red lump, was, can you actually see anything? You probably can't, but they claim that there was a medieval warm period that was warmer than now. But the graph actually says on there, in the newspaper article, that that's for Europe. That's not the globe. And when you look at global temperatures, while the medieval warm period saw unusually warm temperatures in some regions, globally the planet was cooler than current conditions. So you can see those big, the colour charts on the top corners. That's the medieval warm period temperatures, temperature anomaly, and that's the temperature anomalies from 1999 to 2008. And then another thing to note is that the graph, about this graph, is there's a difference between gradual warming and rapid overheating. So studies of Antarctic ice cores suggest that previous global rises of 0.5 degree took hundreds of years. In 2022, global temperatures rose by 0.5 degree in 1 year. So that's the thing we need to be worried about, is the speed. So who produced this graph? It's this man called Tim Ball, who claims to be an environmental consultant and former climatology professor at the University of Winnipeg. He is actually a former professor of geography at the University of Winnipeg. The University of Winnipeg never had an office of climatology. His degree was in historical geography and not climatology. And this happens a lot. People claim that they're climate scientists. They have no evidence that they've ever studied climate science. He has been a chairman to lots of weird things, and including Exxon-funded Friends of Science. He has connections to numerous other think tanks and right-wing organisations. He's now Chief Science Advisor and Policy Advisor at the Heartland Institute. So what's the Heartland Institute? The Heartland Institute is a Chicago-based free market think tank and charity that has been on the forefront of denying the scientific evidence for man-made climate change. The Heartland Institutes have received funding from ExxonMobil and since 1998, but no longer discloses its funding sources. And this big chunk of text here. I'm going to read it out because it's really interesting. It describes the way these people operate. It's from an issue of Nature in 2011. It's their editorial. It says, despite criticising climate scientists for being overconfident about their data, models and theories, the Heartland Institute proclaims a conspicuous confidence in single studies and grand interpretations. Makes many bold assertions that are often questionable or misleading. Many climate skeptics seem to review scientific data and studies not as scientists but as attorneys, magnifying doubts and treating incomplete explanations as falsehoods rather than signs of progress towards the truth. So do you remember that definition of science I talked about, that it's all progress towards the truth, you're not absolute truth. And this attitude of treating it like an attorney is very different. The Heartland Institute and its ilk are not trying to build a theory of anything. All they want to do is muddy the waters, basically. So the next myth is about wind. So wind turbines are not killing lots of birds. If you look, well, you can't see here, but basically this is deaths by wind turbines. This is cats up here. This is in America. There's like almost 2 billion birds killed by cats. 328,000 killed by wind turbines. That's 328,000. Sad, obviously that they died. There's electrocutions, collisions with electrical lines, poison, 72 million, collision with vehicles, and collisions with building glass. And yet, designers claim that wind turbines are destroying the natural world. Then next, the one about low-carbon energy. This is mining quantities for low-carbon energy, 7 million tonnes. For coal, 8 billion tonnes. Oil, 4 billion. Natural gas, 3 billion. There's been a lot of hoo-ha. I acknowledge, mining is a horrific thing, but when you put it in context of the sheer quantities, renewable energy isn't the problem. It is a problem, but it's not the biggest problem. And then the one about heat pumps. Heating the UK with heat pumps uses 1/6 of the energy it would use, that would be used if it was heated by green hydrogen. There's been a big push for green hydrogen, and yet deniers claim that heat pumps are the Soviet-style, costly and noisy. And that whole disinformation about heat pumps has been funded by the gas lobby, because the gas lobby want green hydrogen so they can just plug it into their network, which would make sense if it worked, but it doesn't. Then the one about healthy urban planning. Amsterdam and other cities have been transformed to be cleaner, safer and more livable, and yet deniers are fighting for the rights of the motor vehicle over the human. And then join the dots. The light claims to be fighting mass media, and yet they are sharing a lot of the same stories, as has already been pointed out, that have been used for decades in the mainstream press. So, some reasons for believing science denial. It might be political affiliation. My party believes this, so I believe it too. It might be information that we hear from people we trust. It might be a distrust of medical or scientific establishment because we've experienced something personally. It might be an allure of finding out something we think others have missed and being a hero and fighting authority. It might be that it supports what we want to be true. And actually, to be honest, I don't want the climate crisis to be true. I want to believe they're nonsense, and I would read it, and I'll read it, and if I found it at all convincing, I'd grasp onto it, but I don't, unfortunately. We are all afraid of death, and when we talk about the climate crisis, we have to consider death of much of the life on this earth, and that's a scary thing. And there's doomism, there's grief, there's acceptance, there's fear, there's hope, there's hopium. There's loads of different ways that people react to this information. And then this one. This is like, I wish you could see it, but it's basically this big web here is the ecosystem of wicked problems that are all interrelated, that are causing all the problems in the world. And I can't read that. You certainly can't. So how things like rising debt and infrastructure and public health and income inequality and poverty and disease and just everything's interconnected, and the climate crisis and climate events and environmental degradation and excess CEO pay and inherited wealth, all of these things. It's really complicated. Wouldn't it be nice just to believe a nice simple story about how it's all someone else's fault and everything's going to be okay? We'd all much rather that, wouldn't we? So what can we do? So this is, I've just copied these points out of a really good book called Science Denial, Why It Happens and What to Do About It. I'll just read them out. So, we can cultivate a scientific attitude and an appreciation for the value of science, monitor our own cognitive biases, engage in critical thinking, improve our ability to search and evaluate scientific claims and their sources, advance our algorithmic literacy, which is like really become aware of what we're doing online. It's been discussed already, is kind of driving what we see again. Be alert to those who may be devaluing science and knowledge and expertise. Know the role of your emotions, and how that directs you and where you look for information. Examine the motivations in your reasoning. So why are you motivated to think a certain way? Be willing to consider different points of view. Nurture the value of science and scientific thinking in others, and vote for those who value, support, trust, and fund science. And what can we do when we're speaking to others? Well, this is a really nice quote, which I don't remember. I think it might be Jen Bendel, but I can't remember exactly. The antidote to oppression is not freedom, it is belonging. So listen, be kind, try to find shared values. Ask, what does this mean to you? What evidence would you need to question your conviction? Don't try to prove people wrong, but don't let lies and hate speech go unchallenged. And then a last word from Asimov. I believe in evidence. I believe in observation, measurement, and reasoning, confirmed by independent observers. I'll believe anything, no matter how wild and ridiculous, if there is evidence for it. The wilder and more ridiculous something is, however, the firmer and more solid the evidence will have to be. Okay, questions?